Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another live stream here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So again, I'll be going through some verses from the Dhammapada. So if you're interested in joining along, I'll go ahead and put the link into the live chat so you can follow along if you wish. So I'll start by paying homage to the Buddhas, and then after that, I'll start going through the Dhammapada verses. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So this morning we'll be going through verses, let's see, 91 to, I'd written 91 to 94, but I think we'll actually be doing 91 to 93. Yeah, 91 to 93. So the as usual, I'll read through the verses and then give some explanation. And at the end, I'll take any questions that you might have. So starting with verse 91. So this is, verse 91 here is actually one of my favorite verses from the Dhammapada. So this one says, mindfully they strive upwards. They do not appreciate settling. Like swans leaving behind a lake, they abandon home after home. So this verse here, first off, just picking out a few particular Pali words here that are worth pointing out. So saying they do not appreciate settling. So the Pali word that's translated here as settling is niketa. So niketa is your abode, your home, where you live. And so what this means, similar to what I was talking about yesterday. So this is referring not necessarily literally to your physical dwelling place, although that's an aspect of it, but rather it's referring to the way that we tend to fixate or settle upon anything in the mind. It's referring to the way that we tend to fixate upon an idea or a concept or a self-identity or a viewpoint or a way of perceiving the world, a way of relating to the world. So it's referring to the way that we tend to get stuck in anything in particular, any kind of experience or mind state or attitude or perspective. So in practicing Buddhism, one of the critical things that we're trying to do is to learn how to let go of our grip on any kind of rigid perspective or rigid view or rigid concept or rigid identity whatsoever. And ultimately, even to let go of the perception of objects, the perception of separate, distinct phenomena. So when it says here, they do not appreciate settling, this is what it's talking about. It's referring to the fact that one who is firmly committed to Buddhist practice is someone who's recognized the danger in latching on to any experience or any phenomenon. So they're always trying to relinquish their grip on things rather than, again, settling down on anything in particular. And so and mindfully they strive upwards. So it's also giving this indication that one is always aiming for forward progress. So one is with firm mindfulness and awareness, one is always trying to improve, trying to point oneself towards a higher state of morality, a higher state of mind, a higher development of wisdom. So never Never settling for less than the best, but always aiming for something higher. There's another sutta where the Buddha is talking about his practice before attaining awakening. And he talks about how he would reach various levels of concentration in his meditation practice. And he would enter these very deep, refined states of mind, these very blissful, peaceful states of mind. But upon entering it, he would reflect and he would realize, okay, this is pleasant, this is really nice, but it's not the highest. There's something higher than this. There's something even more sublime than this. There's something even more profound than this. So he would keep striving, keep practicing, trying to get something, an even higher state of spiritual attainment. And so he kept progressing until eventually he attained full awakening. So it's this mind which is not willing to settle with anything less than the best, anything less than the highest possible attainment. And the simile the Buddha uses here, I find very evocative. It says, like swans leaving behind a lake, they abandon home after home. So again, thinking of migratory birds. So they might find a nice lake or a nice forest or a nice place to rest for a little while, but they don't stay long. They stay there for a little while, but then they leave it behind, and they fly off and they go to another place, another lake or forest or mountainside or some other suitable location. And again, they alight there for a little while, but before long they leave it behind and go on, and without any attachment. So when landing in the place, there's the recognition this is temporary. It's just a temporary resting place, but it's not our true home. It's just a stop along the way. And so then when they leave, there's also the sense that they're not leaving behind anything valuable or important, but rather they're just moving on to something better, something more important. And the word translated here as home is oka. So the same word that I referenced yesterday. So in the Dhammapada verses that we went through yesterday, this word oka, which similarly, it does have the literal meaning of home, but it also has this metaphorical sense of any anything that you settle the mind on, anything that you fixate the mind on, or depend upon or rely upon. So we're leaving behind whatever it is that we tend to settle on or rely upon or depend upon. So it's, and one of the reasons we do this is actually because of trust in the Buddha. So as yesterday we were talking about faith, a sense of deep trust in the Buddha, trust in the Dhamma, confidence in the Buddha's awakening and the validity of the Dhamma. So from that, then there comes trust that in letting go of what we're used to holding on to and letting go of the false sense of security that we get through clinging to impermanent things. Through letting go of that, we can get something much more sublime, which is the happiness of non-attachment, the happiness of non-grasping, the happiness of contentment. Then next verse, so this one is verse 92. This one says, those who have no stockpile, who have completely understood eating, whose domain is emptiness and objectless liberation, like birds in the sky, their movement is hard to follow. So here again, the Buddha is using a simile of birds, which I find very notable. So one of the connotations of a bird is a sense of freedom, of limitlessness. So for those of us who have to walk around on the earth, then watching birds fly around seemingly effortlessly is something which brings up a sense of freedom, of spaciousness, of limitlessness. So elsewhere in the suttas, in a few places, the Buddha refers to monastics, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, as being like birds. He says, just as a bird takes off and flies with only its wings, in the same way, a monastic travels around with only their robes and bowl. So the sense of lightness and freedom that comes through not having anything at all. As a flip side, I remember once, many, many years ago, I was staying at a monastery, and a man showed up wanting to be a monk. And he'd come before and asked if it was possible, and he was told, yes, you can come back and stay for a few months and become an anagarika, and we'll see how it goes. So he came back to start his long-term stay, and he showed up with a U-Haul truck. And I was just baffled, because I'm like, that U-Haul truck is bigger than your kuti. Like, why on earth are you bringing all this stuff to the monastery? Like, where do you think you're going to store all of these things? I was just blown away. So this is the polar opposite. So the Buddha says, once again, a monastic, just as a bird travels with only its wings, in the same way, a monastic goes about with only their robes and bowl. So it doesn't say, just as a bird goes around with a giant U-Haul truck, a monastic also goes around with a giant U-Haul truck full of stuff. That's not what the Buddha said. So again, recognizing what a burden it is. Imagine if everywhere you went, you had to have a giant truck to carry around all your stuff. That'd be very inconvenient, not very nice at all. And also similarly, a bird doesn't have a house. It doesn't have a home. It doesn't have a place which they depend upon and rely upon. But rather they can go wherever they wish. They're not constricted or limited by the need to look after a particular dwelling place. Another element of a bird is that here he's saying like birds in the sky, their movement is hard to follow. So he's pointing out here how, for example, if a land animal, such as a deer or a rabbit or something, if they're walking through the dirt or the mud or the snow, they leave tracks. So you can see where they've been, where they're going. But birds don't leave tracks in the sky. So they fly through the sky, but they leave no mark behind. So this also is a reference to how an awakened being is no longer generating karma. They're no longer producing any action in samsara which can cause suffering. So the qualities that the Buddha is describing for someone who can be called like a bird in the sky, as he says, someone who has no stockpile. So similarly, like the man who came to be a monk with a giant U-Haul truck, he had his stockpile. He was bringing it with him. For others, our stockpile is all the things that we store in our house, or the things we store in our room, or it's the bank account where we stockpile money. So those are all forms of stockpiling. But also stockpiling can be how we stockpile ideas and opinions. Or how we stockpile relationships. Some people are friend collectors. This is from before the days of Facebook. People used to do this even before Facebook. So where they would just make friends with as many people as possible, not necessarily out of any interest in actually spending time with those people, but just this idea that having friends gives them a sense of security. Having friends gives them a sense of stability, or it gives them some way to distract themselves from their own suffering, a way of distracting themselves from their own loneliness and craving. So that's also a form of stockpiling. So collecting relationships which are not necessarily meaningful or beneficial or wholesome. So considering, what are we doing? Like, what are we stockpiling? What are we acquiring to ourselves out of some sort of misguided belief that it's going to bring us security and happiness? And next he says, one who has completely understood eating. So parinyata bhojana. So bhojana literally means eating. So one who's completely understood eating. So what is food? What is the purpose of food? Well, it's quite simple. The purpose of food is to keep us alive and healthy so we can continue doing our Buddhist practice. That's its only purpose. But what do we normally use food for? We normally use food for entertainment or distraction or sensual indulgence. And often we get really obsessed with food, really obsessed with the right way food should be. And this is one of the places where having multicultural gatherings can be really valuable, is because it demonstrates the sheer arbitrary absurdity of latching on to one particular way of arranging or preparing food. Because every culture has its own particular concepts of what the right way to prepare food is. So we get caught up in all these obsessions around food, and we forget that food has a very simple basic purpose, which is to keep us alive and healthy. And that we should be eating the right amount, so not too little, not too much. Some people, they eat too much, and that's not good for you. It makes you dull and sleepy, and it's bad for your health. Other people, they don't eat enough. And again, that's not so good. You're prone to fainting spells and blurriness of mind. And again, it's harmful to your health. So knowing the right amount, and also knowing to eat things that are healthy, that are supportive to the health of your body. So the health of our body affects the condition of our mind. And of course, also, if we want to practice well, then we need to have a body that's in good condition. If our body starts falling apart at the age of 30, well, that's going to make it awfully difficult to keep practicing for the rest of our life. So you want to keep your body in reasonably good condition. Then the Buddha says, one whose domain is emptiness and objectless liberation. So in Pali, that's sunyato, emptiness, sunyata. Animitta, so animitta means objectless. So there's no object of attention. There's nothing to focus the mind on. And vimokkha is liberation. So sunyata and animitta, these are actually very closely related concepts. So sunyata, or emptiness, if I go into a detailed explanation, we'll be here all night. But a few days ago, I gave a talk on emptiness. So I recommend referring back to that to get a better understanding of what sunyata is. It's also worth pointing out here, every now and then you'll hear people say that sunyata is not mentioned in the Pali Canon. It's actually mentioned in countless places, and this is one of them. So emptiness and objectlessness. So animitta means no object. So in the sense of an object that you focus your mind on. So for example, if you're staring at a cat, then the cat is your nimitta. It's the object that you're focusing on. If you're staring at your phone, as people spend way too much time doing these days, then your phone is your nimitta. By the way, that's not a good samadhi nimitta. Your phone does not make for good samadhi. So don't use that as your samadhi nimitta. And during meditation, people commonly use some kind of nimitta, some kind of object to focus on, such as their body or their breath sensation or the mind state of loving kindness. So these are all examples of nimitta, of objects of attention, things that you focus the mind on. But the Buddha also spoke about animitta samadhi, so concentration with no object. So bringing the mind into a state of stillness and sharpness, but without fixating on any particular object. So one is letting go of all objects, letting go of the appearance of separate, distinct phenomena, but while keeping the mind very stable and sharp and clear. So this is a very advanced and profound and challenging form of meditation practice, but also one that comes naturally to someone who has well-developed renunciation. To someone whose renunciation practice is very well advanced, then letting go of all things is actually not so difficult anymore. If you're able to let go of coarse physical things in the world, then it's much easier to let go of mind objects when they appear. Then the final verse that I'd like to talk about this morning, so verse 93 from the Dhammapada. This one says, one who has completely eliminated their influences and is not dependent on consumption, whose domain is emptiness and objectless liberation. Like birds in the sky, their path is hard to follow. So here the second and third part of the verse are the same as the previous one. So again, talking about liberation based upon the perception of emptiness and objectlessness. So again, these advanced meditation practices of developing the direct perception of emptiness through relinquishing all objects. But here he's starting with a different statement. So one who has completely eliminated their influences. So influences here is a translation of the word asava. And I credit Ayasoma with this. So influence, I think, is a particularly brilliant translation of asava. So asava is commonly translated as taint, or as corruption, or as pollutant, or sometimes it's translated as influx, or inflow, or outflow. But actually, I think influence is really good, because the asava are the subconscious influences which impel us towards particular unwholesome behaviors. So the kamasava is the influence of sensuality, this impulse towards any kind of sensual experience. Bhavasava is the influence of being, of existence, of identity, of wanting to be someone in particular, wanting to have some kind of particular existence within samsara. And ditthasava, the influence of views, of opinions, of beliefs, wanting to have an opinion, of holding on to your own perspective, your own viewpoint. And avijjasava, the influence of ignorance, this basic root problem, this problem that we don't really understand the Four Noble Truths. We don't really understand the three characteristics. If we truly understood the Four Noble Truths and the three characteristics, we would be fully awakened. So one who has completely eliminated their influences means that they're no longer influenced by sensuality, by any state of existence or any self-identity. They're no longer influenced by the urge to take a stance on things, the urge to have opinions and views and ideas about things. And of course, they're free of ignorance. They clearly understand the Four Noble Truths and the three characteristics. And they're not dependent on consumption. So in Pali, this is ahare anisito. So ahara literally means your intake. And the Buddha talks about four kinds of intake. So one is what you take into your body. That nourishes and builds up your body. And the other three kinds of intake are what we take into our mind. And similarly, that's what builds up our mind. It's what determines the composition of our mind. So what you put in your body determines the composition of your body. And what you put in your mind determines the composition of your mind. So it's important to be very attentive to what we take in. Like, what do we take into our body and what do we take into our mind? And he talks about not being dependent on consumption. This is especially relevant with the mind. We're constantly consuming information, consuming entertainment, consuming experiences. So constantly feeding this bottomless hole of craving in our mind. And an awakened being is, they no longer have any urge to do so. They no longer depend upon consuming mental objects in order to keep themselves distracted and entertained. And again, the Buddha says once again, someone who has these qualities is like a bird in the sky. Their path is hard to follow. And this also is a reference to the fact that one of the characteristics of an awakened being is that they cannot be tracked by Mara. They cannot be deceived by Mara. So when one's mind is free of defilement and delusion, then there's nothing there that can be deceived or tricked anymore. One is completely free from the influences of Mara. So that's the end of these Dhammapada verses for today. So we can respect these Dhammapada verses with 3 sadhus, and then I'll take any questions that you have. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So hello to everyone that's joining in. So hello to Gita, Jayanta, John, Sud, Yankee, Amaranta, Niranjan, Olga, Janaki, Maria, Venerable Dharmashan. Hello, Venerable. Melissa, Michael, Sumashwat, Siyong, and Usha and Apon. So welcome to everyone. And then there's a couple questions online. So Sud asks, if one has to settle for the best, then in terms of joy or pleasure, by this, then is that joy from Dhamma the best joy ever, better than anything else one can find anywhere? Is this right view, or is it wrong to go after pleasure one gets from hearing the Dhamma? It's actually quite good to enjoy hearing the Dhamma, to find happiness and pleasure through hearing the Dhamma, and then to constantly seek out Dhamma so that you can get the joy of hearing Dhamma. That's actually really good. And it's important then to also contemplate the Dhamma that you hear and to put it into practice. It's kind of a running stereotype of the person who goes to the temple and they listen to the Dhamma talk and they're like, oh yes, sadhu, 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 great Dhamma talk. And then they go home and completely forget everything they heard and go right back to greed, hatred, and delusion. And then a week later, they go to the temple and like, oh, great Dhamma talk, so good, so good. And then they go back home and spend the next 6 days cultivating defilement and delusion. It's like, well, okay, at least you're listening to Dhamma talks. That's good. But it would be even better if you followed the advice in those Dhamma talks. So Dhamma talks aren't just meant to be another source of entertainment. They're meant to be a guide that helps keep us progressing along the path towards awakening. So it's important not to approach Dhamma talks purely as a form of entertainment, which is actually mind-blowing. I mean, they're really not entertaining. They're phenomenally boring, if we're going to be perfectly honest here. If you want entertainment, I mean, you're in the age of entertainment. There's great entertainment all over the place these days. Really easy to access entertainment. So if you're going to listen to Dhamma talks, this purpose should be to support you in your Buddhist practice. So finding joy in the Dhamma, again, this is wonderful. And one should find even more joy in practicing the Dhamma, in applying what you hear and what you learn. And Michael says, it is a curiosity that, tuning in 5 minutes late, I thought you might be admonishing those seekers who temple hop, searching for the mysterious answer others got. I don't think I understand. You might be admonishing those seekers who temple hop, searching for the mysterious answer others got.
But then the action phrase, moving from place to place like a bird.
Oh.
So you misunderstood what you said.
Okay. Okay, understood. And that's the last question from online. Anything from the residents here? No? Pretty straightforward. So we can go ahead and end the morning with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And this evening at 7:30 New York time, there'll be our weekly monk chat. So your chance to ask all the random off-topic questions you like. The only requirement is they have to be at least somewhat related to Buddhism. So if you ask about Sufi things, then we won't really have anything useful to say. If you ask about current politics, probably won't have anything useful to say either. But if you ask about Buddhism, we'll have lots of useful things to say. So please join us at 7:30. You'll have a panel of Buddhist monastics, and you can ask all the questions about Buddhism that you like. So see you then.